Hello, welcome to a very hot July 29th. My name is Brooke and this is Seeds of Change Part 3. So we have had two other sessions which you can find on the Spirited Arts Movement website, and I've logged them on my personal Facebook as well. This is my cat. His name is Byron, and I have another cat named Soot, who you might see. So thank you for people who have joined on a very hot Wednesday morning. I hope you are all staying hydrated and taking care of your loved ones and your pets too, with lots of pets. I just want to do a review of our previous sessions together, in case this is your first time tuning in. So our first session, we spoke about different levels of conflict. So people have conflict about stuff, they have conflict in between each other or in between nations, and they have conflict on a cultural level. So how are cultures different? How do we see and make meaning and understanding in different ways? And on the second part, we talked about the theory of intersectionality or anti-oppression. And we also spoke about different ways of knowing. So knowing in our bodies, knowing in intuition, knowing in spirituality, and knowing mentally as well. I just wanted to unpack, because intersectionality is a really big topic and gets political, as it should, very quickly. There's two examples that I think about a lot to describe anti-oppression to someone who maybe is really resisting the idea that people are marginalized and don't know it, or people are privileged and don't know it. So I wanted to start just by that review of what some folks call social location. If you're a cyclist in the city, to make this a lecture, because I know people join in. Hi Pan, good to see you too. One way that I like to describe intersectionality or anti-oppression to someone who is really stuck, doesn't understand, or really doesn't want to see marginalization and privilege and use those words, is being left-handed. So I am a sure. My cat is particularly friendly today. I am a left-handed person. I don't know the world any different than being left-handed, and you're a right-handed person and you don't know any different than being right-handed. If you're right-handed, the world is literally designed for you. Designers design things so that you open it with your dominant hand, or you open it with your non-dominant hand, and then can move around freely. Roads are designed for they're all the right side of your brain to be dominant. Now, design-wise, this totally makes sense. The majority of the world is right-handed, so of course you would build things to work for them. But as a left-handed person, and the biggest thing I think for most left-handed people is elementary school scissors. So scissors just didn't work for me as a kid, and I didn't even know it, and so you find ways to constantly adapt. And the other way I would say about left-handed, which I like about this example, is right-handed people are used to the world. This is hard to show with one person, but they're used to seeing the world in a very distinct way, and they're not even aware of that. Whereas left-handed people, I'm used to people mirroring me. So sometimes when someone says, put up your left hand, and everyone puts up their left hand, it's strange for me, because I'm so used to seeing people mirror me, people match me. So again, it's kind of a silly example, especially compared to other places of deep marginalization, but it's a way to explain it to people who maybe who are really averse to talking about the politics of it. And the other one I like to describe, which is a little bit more political, is biking versus driving. And that one gets kind of at the risk of being marginalized. So if you're a cyclist in Edmonton, there's a few different ways that you can cycle. One is on the sidewalk, which is illegal. Legal except if it's like 2 meters, so a large sidewalk. The other is in a bike path, which you had to fight really hard to advocate to have in the city, or multi-purpose trail, which isn't, you're not dependent on where that goes, or on the road. And if you bike on the road, you're at the most risk of being hit by a car. And I'm very aware as a cyclist in this city that the roads are not meant for me. And each time I cycle, no matter which path, there's a different risk. And even if you use the bike paths, when you come to an intersection, you're needing to monitor that much more. You're needing, because the roads aren't designed for you. They're designed for something that is much scarier and bigger than you. And then drivers have very, very strong opinions about you taking up space in the roads because they believe that the roads are for them. Now I feel like this seems like a meandering example, but for me it's a really good one to describe to people the risks that marginalized people have when living in a society that's literally designed for something else. And there's a huge amount of lobbying for roads to be that way, but we don't remember. And so especially in Edmonton, where the roads and the city is completely designed for this, then as a cyclist, you're literally having a higher risk to get around that way, and you have to advocate for any basic safety to get around. So I'm sorry if this one is a political one as well, but I find I cycle regularly, it's the way I commute. I think about this all the time, that drivers aren't even aware that their Ford 150 is a death machine for me. Because for them, they're just getting wherever they're going, and stopping and starting out the lights, and they want to go left. They're not thinking about the cyclist and pedestrian that is like needing to assess risks in a very different way than they do, because also the laws, this is a pet peeve of mine, and I won't ramble too long about it, but to turn left and to turn right on reds, or really when it works in the traffic by a razor thin, is making it unsafe for pedestrians or for cyclists, but for you, you're just trying to get to where you're going. And so these are two examples that I find can describe intersectionality. Yes, the cycle and driving one is political. If someone really doesn't want to hear about racism or ableism, or is stuck in their personal story. And that's kind of the other thing. And the segue today, we're going to talk about communication styles and how do we communicate. And I have a few different models to work, but I do want to say that this is a small session, this hour-long session, and then our next Wednesday at 9 a.m. we're going to be having a Zoom meeting to talk about accountability. For me, accountability isn't something that we can lecture on. I can't yell into the void about accountability, because for me that is a strange irony. Accountability for me needs to be built in community with other people, and I'm not an expert on accountability. I'm sharing theory. So I wish for us to have a community conversation about accountability, and I will double back when I get the Zoom link from Robertson Wesley United Church, and I will put that into this comment, and I will outreach that in my regular channels. So next Wednesday at 9 a.m. we'll be having a Zoom conversation, so we can see each other's faces and kind of share some ways people can be accountable, and the concept of accountability. But today is about communication styles. So I see that Pan has signed in, and a few other people have too. So I'm just curious, and I'll write this comment in here. What do you think of? What metaphors come to mind when you think about communicating in a conflict? I'll give people a little bit of time to think about that. So today we're talking about communication styles, and just to be transparent, I saw this as a precursor to talking about accountability. So how do we first communicate as individuals in conflict? And I'm going to go through two theories. I should say the previous conversations I've had through Seeds of Change, these theories are not mine. Michelle LeBaron and Vipulé have written many books about intercultural conflict. Oh, there's a delay. Okay, I'll speak a little bit slower. It's a busy hot morning in my reality, which we'll talk about reality. And then intersectionality comes from Kimberly Crenshaw, but has been built upon a lot, and is now in many mainstream spaces and not as well as academia. And the conflicts today too, what we're talking about, I will cite as well. So these are theories out in the world that I'm sharing in this medium, but I do not own them, they are not mine. So what metaphors come to mind when you think about communicating in a conflict? And people can add this as we go, and we can use them as an example. That's okay, Pen. If it comes up for you, let me know. So again, today will be me kind of sharing some different theories about conflict communication, and then next Wednesday we'll have a Zoom conversation to talk about accountability, and I will put the Zoom link in here, and I will share it on the Spirited Arts Movement Facebook page and the other parts as well. Because this is Facebook Live, please feel free to comment on any questions, but you can also email me at Brooke, and I'm going to put this in here. You can email later questions to brooke@rwc.org is my email. So the communication styles I wanted to speak about today kind of connect, and I'll review the different ways of knowing. So the last time we spoke about more than just knowing with our mind. So we have intuition and emotion, and somatic is the fancy word, but like in our bodies. And then today we'll focus on personal conflict styles, so you as an individual. But again, a review of part 1 is that we are individuals, so you have a conflict with people in your life, maybe, I don't know, partners, parents, children, but then we also live in society. So the social movements exist as a conflict as well. Black Lives Matter, police brutality, and those can fit in this model as well. But today I'm going to be speaking about personal conflict styles. So you, maybe even with yourself, which is a deep philosophical thing we could talk about, but you and one other person, or you and maybe 2 other people. Oh, feeding pigeons. So you think you're feeding one, and then you're bombarded. Yeah, when you're open to all the conflict and abuse and all the trolls. That's a great one. So, and what I see in that metaphor is really vulnerable when you're in conflict, and unpredictable and attacking. Thank you, Pen, for that metaphor, and please keep them coming about conflict. This today is about the one-on-one conflict, but again, this can be extrapolated into nation states, communicating with more than one person, and this is really how you might communicate. So yeah, how do we talk through conflict? How are we in conflicts? And something about this, again, the individual being in a structure, is that conflict communication styles exist in culture. So if there's 2 takeaways that I would love, that I hope work, are nothing is right or wrong. You grow up with an understanding of what's acceptable and unacceptable, but nothing is right or wrong. And the other cultural thing is that your perception of reality isn't necessarily reality for someone else. So And we'll kind of unpack those as theories. But so I know in my culture, screaming at people is seen as really embarrassing, being aggressively emotional. For good reason. It doesn't make people feel good. It doesn't. We're in our culture, that is not a way to solve conflict, is by screaming at people, and we consider that as wrong. And so, but in a conflict theory, interculturally, there's not necessarily a right or wrong way to have conflict, and we're taught how to communicate to get our way to solve something, and it's just cultural. So what I'm noting here is all cultural. There is loads of ways of unpacking intercultural conflict. For example, my favorite one is time. How do we relate to time? But today, the thing I wanted to speak about, culture and nothing being right or wrong, is indirect, direct, emotional, non-emotional. So, oh, another metaphor. Yes. So another metaphor that's being described is like glass and talking through glass. So you don't know where things land, and you're hoping you're communicating the way you want, but maybe you're not. So we have, culturally speaking, we talk about direct or indirect ways of communicating. So direct is, you have an issue. The example that how it was described to me is someone's cutting their lawn at 6 a.m. and you can't sleep. So direct communication is you would leave your house or call them or text your neighbor and say, hey, can you turn off the lawnmower? It's really early in the morning. That's a direct way of communicating. You had an issue, you asked for it to be resolved. Indirect is that you don't say, hey, don't use your lawnmower at 6 a.m. You might tell their partner, hey, that was really loud. I hate how loud that is. Oh my God, that's so loud. Can you turn that off? I really hate when people do that. It's an indirect way. And I find this really interesting culturally because we speak about not wanting passive language, at least the culture I grew up in. However, in some cultures, it's really rude to go up directly to someone and say, hey, don't do that, I don't like that. So there's a concept of saving face, and in that way, an indirect way allows someone to not be embarrassed. It allows the conflict to still be solved, but not saying directly what you need or want, and going through other channels or saying it in a soft way that the other person can hear. You can see where conflict can happen with both of these. And emotional, non-emotional to me is really key. So non-emotional, again, your neighbor is mowing the lawn way too early for you, so you have composure and you go just like I am right now and you say, hey, can you not do that? Thanks, and you leave. Emotional would be that you have some bite or again, that way of knowing, that emotional way of knowing, and that's how you communicate. This one's an interesting for me as a white settler Canadian culture. I feel like I was taught to always solve conflict without emotions. And when I was learning this, I learned it with Americans, and Americans had no problem going up to someone and saying, hey, turn off your bleeping lawnmower, I'm trying to sleep. I know as a white settler Canadian, I was taught that escalates conflicts, and it can. However, here's the caveat. There's some people, because of their culture, because of their preferences, if you politely go to them and tell them, hey, can you please turn off your lawnmower, they won't listen to you. It's like it doesn't land for them. So you need to use emotion to communicate. And you need to fit a cultural understanding if you want your message to land. So I just wanted to unpack those, and they kind of exist in a quad or a spectrum, and contextual. So emotional, non-emotional, to use emotion to get across your conflict, what you need to communicate, or direct, indirect. And there isn't a right or a wrong. It's just dependent on who you're with and how you wish to be heard. Because you can be incredibly polite and incredibly indirect You can go to that person's wife, you can write them a note, and that might not land well for them, and they might feel really offended by that. So a little tidbit is to communicate in the context that you're in, and attempt, in all of what I'm explaining here, I'm attempting to get us on the same page for agility, and then it allows that nuance that Seeds of Change is really looking for. So direct, indirect, emotional, non-emotional. Again, any questions about that, let me know. And the other communication styles are a little bit more complex, and I have videos that describe them. So I'm going to talk through them, and then I'll share the links below in our page. So far, we're, again, just a review, we're talking about person-to-person conflict and an individual. And we've spoken about direct, indirect, emotional, non-emotional ways of communicating, and that there isn't right or wrong ways, it's just what culturally is appropriate at the time, and what will be heard and understood by another person. And there's loads of examples about this in the world, so just to kind of finish that, when you see the Black Lives Matter or the police brutality, and moderates in America saying, well, they really shouldn't yell, and they really shouldn't loot, and if we just all sat down together and talked in a calm manner, this could be solved. And the reason why that discourse makes people even angrier is because that's not the only way to solve conflicts, and what that does is negate the emotional way of knowing. So if you insist that everyone sit down and talk in a calm manner, I call it the liberal way of solving conflicts, talk in a calm manner, and things will be solved. You're negating a complete way of knowing, you're negating people's deep frustration and emotions, and also the Black Civil Rights Movement has been sitting down calmly, changing policies. This is my gesture for this, like smooth and flat, and it hasn't worked for hundreds and hundreds of years. So when we demand, when a dominant culture demands this calmness and smoothness, what it does is it doesn't disrupt the dominant culture. It's seen as like an acceptable way, but it hasn't created any social change in the ways that the marginalized communities desperately need to literally survive. And so the emotion, although for what I call a liberal way of solving conflict feels scary, it's essential and needed for Black Lives Matter, Indigenous people in Canada to be understood, and that they're not playing by white liberal rules anymore. And I'm saying this with emotion because I think it's really important that if you demand that all conflict be solved like a smooth glass table, it's not going to work for people. And it negates emotions, and it negates deeply rooted frustrations. So if you're in a conflict with someone and they're communicating in a way that makes you uncomfortable, and you're of a dominant culture, for example, like white America, it's not on them to make you feel comfortable. It's not on Black Lives Matter to make white people feel safe in hearing this message, because they've done that for hundreds of years and it's not working. It's not solving things. If anything, it's placating and centering white fragility. So that's kind of a way to extrapolate that very simple cultural thing. And it's hard. It's hard to take on anger and emotion, but at times it's essential to actually getting conflict done, is hearing that and hearing through the emotion, validating the emotion, and not asking for it to be done in a way that feels safe, that can be negated or invalidated. So that's very basic communications. The other two theories I want to talk about today, and again, interpersonal, your fights with your family and your friends and your loved ones, is where this is, and then I'll extrapolate it to the larger culture. There's one called the Thomas Kilmann. Has anyone heard of the Thomas Kilmann indicator? Thomas Kilmann, it's quite popular. And you may have used it without even knowing. It gets used as quizzes and like, what type of animal are you? So Pan asks a really good question about emotional tactics, emotional change tactics, and I think this is key. So, personal thing about me, I do get emotional in conflict, and so my journey has been how to be non-emotional in conflict. But if you're naturally non-emotional in conflict, um, then how would I describe this? It's being really key. So where I very, very first learned this was through a Philadelphia place called Training for Change, and I did their training. And that's where I first learned that sometimes you have to match people. And I do this working with high-risk youth as well, if I need them to hear me. So if someone, it's not that you have to manipulate the emotions, but if someone is being really emotional and not listening to you in another way, then you can raise your voice. You can use different language. But I would say the goal, so it doesn't escalate out of control, is to be matched, to be heard. So in that case, it's to match to be heard, or if it's an interpersonal conflict, you can say like, I'm sorry, your emotions, I'm having a really hard time hearing you and your emotions, and you can ask to speak non-emotionally. And maybe you use a different medium to do that. Maybe you use text, maybe you use email, maybe you use the phone, to create that buffer of safety. I know that most everything in the world says to have conflicts face to face, but if you're trying to de-escalate the emotions, these other mediums can be a way to do that. What I would also say too is, so make sure that you're using emotions to be heard, to be understood by the other person, and to be valid. So one way is to raise your voice. The other is to use escalated language and kind of humor in it. And that's a way to use emotion. So just being really intentional about it. Maybe it's swearing, maybe it's laughing, maybe it's like making your body bigger. Again, not to escalate the conflict, but just to be heard. That is an excellent question. And we can talk more about that in Zoom too, because I know in the culture I was raised, using emotions that way are really scary. And so you need to be grounded in yourself so that it doesn't get escalated beyond what you can control. Yes. Oh, examples of escalated language. I was resist saying swearing, like dropping some F-bombs, like not offending someone, but if you're talking to someone who's dropping loads of like derogatory language, say it back. It's also a way, especially so this is where if I work with clients, high-risk youth, I'm working professionally, I'm really mindful of how I use language to connect with them, to move beyond a power dynamic. And that's looking at a professional relationship, but you can also do that in your personal relationship. So match the language that people are using, or say, hey, that's not in my boundaries to use the F-bomb. I don't like that word, can use a different word. But yeah, attempting to not change someone's communication style as soon as you meet them to something that suits you better. And again, that's more of a professional relationship than a personal one. If you're in a personal relationship, you can ask for what you need to feel safe in that moment, and so can the other person. But yeah, escalated language for me is like F-bombs, and again, not swearing. I have a rule with youth, they can't swear at me, they can't call me a blankly blank, but if they are calling like inanimate objects blankety blank, or they're frustrated, I understand that that's a place of frustration, and a really common way that people deal with frustration is by swearing. Yeah, so escalated language. So the Thomas Kilmann is also in a grid of assertiveness to cooperation when you're in a conflict. And just very simply, and then I'll share a link, so he has 5 different types of how people deal with conflict interpersonally. One is avoiding. So they just completely sidestep it, they don't talk about it, they put their head in the sand and they move on. When people use avoiding as a conflict tactic, it's often that they don't value their relationship enough or their own needs enough. It's low stakes for them. This might be a stranger on the bus says something that offends you. You just avoid it. You're like, whatever, I'm gonna get off this bus really soon. It doesn't matter. And oh, good, yeah, this is a really common conflict communication, and I'll share the link and you can share this around. Accommodating. So this is probably what you were told to do as a kid. I know I was. So you value the relationship more than what you need. So you share your toys. You are told to share. You're told to not fight with your sibling. So you're told to accommodate, even though you might not want to. You do anyways because you care more about the person than you do about the thing or the conflict. And so the problem with this is if you continually accommodate, you're satisfying the other person's concerns at the expense of your own. So if you've been taught to do this, being a people pleaser, that accommodating makes it safer for you, eventually you'll need to unlearn this because you will have poor boundaries later in life. So I'm using childhood as an example, but really it can exist in adulthood too. So you're accommodating, just like the word says. You're putting aside your own desires to make it work for the sake of the relationship. The other one that I'll talk about is competing. So you want your way or the highway. And this means that you don't value the relationship as much as you value what's needed. And so I naturally I do find this more, yes, Pan's asking about gendered socializing. I really do think this. So I think that the patriarchy has taught femme folks to accommodate and men folk, masculine people, to compete. And so competing is when, and I'd say our culture too, patriarchally, that I want what I want, I'm gonna lead, and the relationship doesn't matter. So I want that oil, again, I'm to extrapolate, I want that thing, I'm gonna go and take it. You have a problem with it? Yeah, it's so culturally baked into it, competing. Now, and you'll see it in the YouTube clip, there's sometimes, so again, there's no right or wrong, it's just contextual. So again, to use like Black Lives Matter or civil rights movements, sometimes you need to compete because that's the only way that you'll be heard. So I see this, indigenous cultures, as I understand them, are not naturally competitive, and even that is a vast generalization. But if you want to be heard by colonial governments and respected, which respect is a giant word we should unpack by Zoom, you compete. So it is about the resources. This one's also valuable if I find if I need to be assertive. So the example they use is customer service or in an emergency when you need quick, decisive decisions. And I find this helpful if I get permission from a group. So, hey, we need to do this thing in 24 hours. Can I, and I call myself Bossy Brooke, can I be Bossy Brooke and just like be directive? That's what I do to get around just doing it and not taking people's feelings into account. So that's competing. There's places where that's really damaging, and then places sometimes when you need it, like emergencies or quick, fast decisions. The other one is collaborating. So this is when you're finding a win-win solution that values the relationship, that values people's concerns. It's coming together and saying, what can we do differently? I don't want to give up my values, I don't want you to give up yours. So the example that I've been bouncing back to you is your child. And so this might be, well, I don't want to share my special Barbie with you, you can't play with all my toys, but maybe we can buy like a doll house so our dolls can play together. So that would be a collaborating with the other person because you care about them, you respect their point of view, and you want to find a solution where you both win. Sometimes the issue with collaborating is it doesn't work. If not everyone wants to collaborate, it can also take a long time, and is not great in emergency situations. Also, if another person, if they're avoiding and you're constantly trying to collaborate, then you'll have a conflict about styles of communicating, which is why I wanted to talk about this and share kind of some of the same things before moving on to talking together as a group. And the one that's kind of in the middle, which we're also told to do all the time as a kid, is compromise. So that's smack in the middle, because with compromising, no one really wins and no one really loses. So my toy example is you have to, have joint custody of your toys with your sibling. Compromising might be some of what we see passed in legislation. So instead of, I'm trying to think of an example, I feel like with conflict styles and government, often things are watered down to appease. So maybe I'll switch to an example for government in Canada, and I won't use specific examples. So avoiding might be a complete ignoring of an issue. It doesn't even come up. It's not on the bill. It's not on the docket. Accommodating would be like, yeah, okay, we'll just do this thing because we don't want that group of people mad at us, or the opposite, expecting a citizenry, expecting us as Albertans to accommodate certain things. Compromising happens all the time, but competing might be a majority government, so they don't care. They don't care what other constituents say, they're just going to do what they're going to do. And then compromising would be, okay, I see people are angry about this bill we're trying to pass, so let's water it down, let's change it a bit, and so it's not our ideal vision, but people are less angry at us. That's compromising, and I think that happens a lot in the parliamentary system. And then collaborating would be, okay, we really want to build the best thing here, how can we do that together? Or reparations. So, I'm curious. Talked about a few different examples. So, reparations. Yeah. So compromising, like, yeah, well, we're gonna build a pipeline, but we're gonna just like pay you a little bit for it. That's also like appeasing and not really solving a conflict or getting at the root of how people feel. That's just, we'll compromise. Here we go. And because collaborating takes a long time, right? It's making sure everyone's on the same page, is doing some of that symbolic work. And sometimes the stakes aren't there. Maybe a really good example, just to double back on this, is you're with friends and you're deciding where to go for dinner. There's always that person, right, that's like, I don't care where we go, you decide. I'm just trying to pull up this YouTube. And the other people are like, okay, I guess we'll decide for everyone. I'm gonna see if this YouTube works. And then there's someone who's like, I want to go to this place. Let's vote and we'll go there. I consider that more of a competitive style to compromise. So I want to do this. Do you want to do this? And then there is the accommodating. Well, I'll just go to where you want. I prefer vegetarian, but yeah, we'll go to a Thai place and they'll have some vegetarian stuff. So that would be kind of accommodating. And collaborating would be like, where should we go? What kind of food do you want to eat? Yes, it is. Like, if you're with a whole bunch of avoiders, it's really hard to make a decision. So, and even avoiders and accommodators, it's really hard to make a decision. They're waiting for someone else to give a framework for them to pile on, right? They're not, and then if you have someone who's collaborating though, and my bias is I really like collaborating, it can take longer and really annoy competitors or the other folks. So to be like, I don't know, what kind of food do you want to eat? What's open right now? And like asking all the questions and making people contribute when they don't want to can frustrate people. So sometimes collaborating isn't the best way. That's a really good way to also talk about it. I'm just trying to share the link here. If you just give me a second. Copy link to paragraph. So I have a quick YouTube that I will share. at the end of this session, because it's not sharing now, that is just a summary of the Thomas Kilmann conflict tool. And this is used all the time. I should say, a critique of this conflict model is that we're not static. So it's typing, and with any typing there's labeling. It also doesn't take into any account context or cultural considerations. So these types exist. It's a North American model, so it's not taking into account other cultures. Also that we can change under pressure or in different situations. Different things are required of us, and all of that. So it was created in the 80s. It doesn't always have all the nuance, but it's a really great place to start and kind of understand where we are and where our biases are. So I mentioned I naturally really like to collaborate, but I have to learn that sometimes people don't want to collaborate. They don't want to spend 20 minutes figuring out where to eat. And then some people accommodate all the time and maybe need to learn to be more directive. Director is another word that I know for competing. So that is the Thomas Kilmann model. I will put a link in there, and we can talk more about this in person too. But it's also important to kind of own the preferred ways that you like to talk, and what you're asking of other people. So again, if you're always a collaborator and you don't like directive people, that's just you. There's no right or wrong. And the other model I really wanted to get at in the last 15 minutes is the Haven model of communication. And so this is, let's see if this one works too. Oh, there we go. I figured this out. So this is the Haven model of communication. And this comes from an institute in Gabriola Island, in BC. And they run sessions. I'm also just going to do the Thomas Kilmann right now. They run sessions and personal development workshops. And I had taken this in 2017, and I found it really essential. And the link is there, and I'm going to do my best to run through it. So, it also exists in basic. Now you're going to play. This one looks like it's not copying. My apologies. So I will send that one later. So the example that they use is that you were in a fight with your partner the night before, and you meet them the next day, and they're crying. Now, humans naturally really like making meaning, and we like interpreting things very quickly so that we understand. And the Haven model is asking us to take a step back. So it's asking us to look at checking out our assumptions. That's the biggest thing that this is about. So you see someone crying, and you might start to build an idea in their head. Or another modern example is you were texting with someone and they ghost you. That's a really common thing that happens nowadays in dating. And you start to build all these stories as to why they're not talking to you. So they fell down a well. They hate you now. Whatever happens in your idea. So this is the other big takeaway that I want to do today, is that is just a story in your head. And that comes from your context, that comes from your childhood, that comes from your day, but that is not necessarily true for that other person. So you see someone crying, and you can ask, like, why are you crying? I see that you're crying. Can we talk about that? And they might say, yeah, like my contact lens is messed up, and that's why I'm crying. And then all those stories can just completely flatten because you asked, you saw something and you asked. The other senses that they ask you to look at is like hearing, so what you hear, what you smell, what you taste. So really just being in your body and experiencing something, and then seeing what stories you're making up about it, and then checking in. The other thing about the Haven model that personally really blew my mind is feelings. So they define feelings as being in your body, an embodied experience of warm, open, vulnerable. Well, vulnerable is a big one. Or closed, detached, uninterested, and not emotions. Emotions are kind of the next step. So I'm sad is an emotion. I feel lacking energy. That's a feeling. And your feelings are not necessarily someone else's. So the other thing about this model is that it's really about you. It's about you checking your assumptions. It's not about you putting them on. So no one makes you feel, this is my little cheat sheet, no one makes you feel anything. You feel yourself. So you feel love, you feel dislike, you feel hate. So again, our minds are so quick to make stories very quickly and do interpretation. Also, there's no right or wrong here. There's only agreeing or disagreeing. So you interpret something. And then you judge or you speculate. And then your feelings are just in your body, positive or negative. And the other two things are your intentions. So we could talk forever. Yeah, we could maybe do some body stuff about our intentions. And rarely we don't intend to harm someone. Generally, we're just clumsy. That's what I believe. So I have an intention to understand you. What I feel you intend to do is be understood, to express yourself. And then your actions are what you do. So that is the communication model, but it all exists in context, and it asks us to check in with people. So someone's not texting you all day, you could send them a text, and instead of saying like, are you mad at me, you must hate me, jumping very quickly to interpretation, you can say like, hey, why haven't I noticed you're really quiet, why haven't you texted me? And I really like sharing this model with folks because you're not responsible for other people's emotions. And it's important for you to check in with what your emotions are and own them, and own your interpretations as well. And the biggest thing we can do is be open to our interpretations changing. So I think you were taken advantage of. Yes, the Haven model is what's linked there, and it describes this in about 5 minutes. Also, nobody is ever right or wrong, so you can agree with someone's interpretation or disagree, but you can't tell them that their interpretation is wrong. You could just say like, well, I'm not crying because I'm sad. I'm crying because my eyes hurt. And hope that they change their interpretation. And this is where you do see a problem when people are like, well, I don't believe you, I think you're right, you're mad at me and that's why you're crying. And all you can do in that case is say, nope, my eyes just hurt, sorry you feel that way. And really getting back at like, I see you crying, I hear you're upset, and your feelings, like I feel, one thing that gets kind of bandied around is I feel safe or unsafe. So I feel detached, like I need to detach from you right now. I feel uncomfortable. I feel a dislike. And an interesting thing to me about the word vulnerability, which slipped out, is that it exists in both of these things, and vulnerability is fascinating. But to kind of bring it back, because this is all about how to interpret what's happening right now, so we very quickly get into interpretation and opinions about what's happening, and don't necessarily take a moment and be like, I'm seeing a lot of chaos. I'm seeing a lot of upset or hurt. I know one thing now to kind of bring it full is that when I see people getting really mad in grocery stores, not all people, but I sometimes wonder if they experience trauma, and this is the way they know how to communicate, is by yelling at people and being angry and upset. Should they be doing that and making other people feel angry and upset? Probably not, but it's just a way to kind of look at the world and say like, that person looks angry, I wonder if they are angry, I wonder why. And not just build stories about the news either, and kind of looking at what's underneath the anger that you might be seeing, and asking about it. And this is a really like interpersonal, because obviously you can't ask George Floyd's family personally, but you can listen to what's in the news and hear them from there. So today was just a lot of me talking and sharing models. I'll share the Thomas Kilmann one as well, and the Haven model here. Yeah, and I want to say we all interpret really quickly, and then we make an explanation, and then we're like done. It's really common in how humans work. We analyze conflicts, and then we build ideas from there. But this model and other models is asking for a step back, so that your intention is to really understand and move forward that way. So are there any questions about what I've spoken about so far? Today was definitely me just talking. The Haven model also gets at the other ways of knowing as well a bit. So I'm checking intuition and checking, some of the other things we might believe about ourselves, and just learning. I'm gonna try to post it now. It was awkward before. It's definitely embedded. So again, these aren't my theories, I didn't make them up. And there's loads of other theories and other cultural ways of understanding things. But these are some real brass tacks to allow us to see why people are angry right now, and to not discredit their anger because it makes us uncomfortable, for us to just check in when we're making stories about people, and that kind of thing. So I don't have the Zoom link yet, but next Wednesday we will Zoom. So I encourage you in the meantime, I invite you to please be part of our conversation about accountability and what is accountability and how do we be accountable, because that's a huge topic and a way to move forward. Oh, I'm so glad. And this is great, Pan. Yeah, this is leadership and communication training, and there's loads of different ways of doing this, but these are some theories that I found personally really helpful. Even just to understand what's happening. Like I've once worked with a conflict avoider, and it was just very uncomfortable the whole time, and I wish I had this model because I would have been able to do something about it other than just being frustrated that someone is conflict averse. So it allows you to kind of see yourself, but also see other people. I think that's what we're all about, and the seeds of change. I'll give you a couple more minutes for any other comments, and then we'll say goodbye for the day. Okay, well, I'll leave you for today. Please email me any thoughts or questions or concerns. I also wish to be accountable for these sessions, so sharing where the theories come from. Oh, yeah, I can be conflict averse too. I don't like it in my personal life. I'm trying to get better at it. Great. Have a really good day, and I hope we all chew on kind of our preferences in this work and how to, sorry, Pan is just talking about avoidance, and something that's been helpful for me is to realize when avoidance or indirect communication is actually the best way to deal with something. It's not always, by far, but for me what's important with these models is to be dexterous, like to have dexterity and agility. So if you're around a bunch of competitive people, like that is not my preference at all. I don't like it. but I can see it and say like, okay, I'm gonna compete too, so that I'm heard and matched, and that I'm not in a conflict with myself by trying to collaborate with a bunch of competitors. Or avoiding sometimes is honestly the best way, and allows the other person to do some of the labor too if they want to resolve a conflict. So they're all totally fine ways of solving conflict in the right space, and learning that. You're all awesome as well, and I will see you next Wednesday. Okay, bye.